On February 18th, Redwing takes flight. Is this feathered ally a hidden powerhouse or just for show? I'll break him down with theory-crafted decks, revisit Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, and see if Baron Zemo and Loki are worth your keys. Time to attack. Of course I'm getting Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. I think the future is super bright for this card. This card will be strong. I am as confident as I've been about anything. So of course, I have no choice but to get this card. So, strong words, but was I right or wrong? I ultimately was wrong.
You are a fool.
But I think I was right. I am the reason that this future card, Isan, got nerfed. I exposed how strong Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross would be with that card, and they completely reworked Isan and absolutely destroyed my future telling ability. So that goes to show you, don't depend on leaked information. Ultimately, I still got Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, mostly because I got him before I knew Isan was changed. That said, he is still a good card. He is better than a lot of people were giving him credit for. He is a very strong turn 2 play. There are numerous turn 2s where opponents only play a 1-cost card or nothing at all, because that's just how people build their decks. So when you draw him on turn 2, he is pretty powerful overall. And getting that one draw, focus on the deck thinning. Who cares what he draws? You now have the ability to draw into more of your deck. And I heard from a couple of people that the theory-crafted decks that I had for him were fantastic. That should be one of the deck videos for this week. So overall, he is a decent card. Now, I do not think he is a must-get, because this comes down to mathematics, which you know this channel doesn't do. And he probably increases your deck's win percentage, your deck's consistency by a couple of percentage points. Is that really enough to move the needle? Is that really enough to notice? Probably not. So I think he's still replaceable in the vast majority of, or all of the decks he's in, even though he's a decent card. So ultimately, I think you're good passing on him. And if you do, you're not missing too much. But if you did get him, he can be a useful card in certain decks. The entire Spotlight week includes Redwing, which is a somewhat of a unique card and a mash of different archetypes, which can be very interesting. We have Baron Zemo. He mostly goes into mill decks, but also hasn't really been included in many of the meta mill decks lately, except for mine. And then you have Loki, who was one of the most busted cards on his initial release, but has just fallen completely off the map now. So let's dig into each of these cards individually. Redwing is a 3/3 that the first time he moves, you add a card from your hand, a random card, to the location Redwing moved from. So he definitely gets paired with move cards, because Redwing cannot move on his own. Actually, a thought came to me with Penny Parker, potentially, and her Spider, who gives a move to the card it merges onto. So maybe there's something there. I don't have a theory-crafted deck around that idea. But you do need cards in addition to Redwing that move, and then you also need cards that you actually want to pull from your hand. So everybody's mind goes toward big power cards. That's where my mind went to. But maybe there's just some synergy that people aren't thinking of, that just getting an additional card, not trying to high roll, just getting decent value is where it's at. So I think I do have one deck that maybe leans into that a little bit more. So let's get into these theory crafted decks. So for this deck, we are leaning heavily into Zoo. Not heavily, this is a Zoo deck. So we have plenty of 1-cost cards. We have armor to protect those 1-cost cards. And the idea here is moving Redwing to get out a free Khazar, Blue Marvel, Vision, or Onslaught. So in all likelihood, you'll have at least one of those cards. And so on turn 5, potentially, you play your Cloak and something else. Maybe a Redwing as well on turn 5. Maybe you already have Redwing down. Maybe on turn 4, an Iron Fist into Redwing. Or on turn 5, you can do that as well with another 1-cost card. But essentially the idea is to empty your hand as much as possible. Get Redwing down by turn 5 and a move card by turn 5. And then on turn 6, you play one of your higher costed cards. And then Redwing, because it can move, dumps down another high costed card. So that's the general idea here. And when I was talking about Redwing just making decks a little bit better, not trying to high roll, that's what you have to lean into when you are playing a Series 2 deck. And ultimately, that's what this deck aims to do. And of course, there aren't a lot of options at Series 2, but I think this deck kind of should be good and help its performance overall, because getting a free one of these Khazar, Blue Marvel, Vision, or Onslaught is just fantastic for what this deck is trying to do. And so that is Series 2. Let's move on to Series 3. Series 3 is the popular Dracula dump. We have Strong Guy in here to benefit from dumping our hand. Of course, we have a ton of 1-cost cards. We have Wasp as an easy way to get a card out of our hand. Redwing, we are moving with either Iron Fist or Doctor Strange. As you can see, every card we can play is either at 3 power or below. So ultimately, Doctor Strange moves Redwing. He also might move Strong Guy, so you need to be aware of that. But those are our 2 move cards in Doctor Strange and Iron Fist. So we can get one of our big power cards down. In theory, we could get a Dracula down as well. And then we can soak a turn 5 and Sunspot soaks. Then we play our Infinite. We have Giganto and Death in hand. So it really is just going to depend on how the game unfolds. But by and large, this is my idea for what Dracula Strong Guy dump looks like. So the trend of my full series, no limit decks, theory crafted decks go is that it's kind of just a mash of ideas that might be doing too much. So for this one, we're primarily leaning into move and some bounce. We have Falcon and Beast to build up a big Human Torch. There's Heimdall. Redwing is here because now Redwing, you can move with Iron Fist, Aranya, Madam Web, Heimdall. There's a lot of options there. Black Swan is just free 1-cost cards, continue to build up our large Human Torch. We can play that out on the last turn along with a Heimdall, or a Redwing, moving that and getting Heimdall down. There's a lot of interesting options. Vision is the one card in here I'm not super sure about, but getting him down as well early is just fantastic. A 5/8 free, well 0/8 if Redwing ends up pulling that. So I'm not quite sure how Redwing functions in here, but it's cool to have both Falcon and Redwing in the same deck. So that is the idea I went into, leaning more heavily into the move side of things. Baron Zemo is a decent card, but you really only play him in mill. So if you aren't interested in playing mill, I'm not interested in playing mill. I've said a handful of times recently on this channel that it is just not a good deck overall. So if you like mill, more power to you. That's where this goes. If you don't like mill, you won't use this card. So I don't use this card. I used it for my 1 mill video, and then I put it back on the shelf. I just don't use it. It recruits or places the card that costs the least from your opponent's deck. So that's why you really want to mill through your opponent's deck. Milling is getting rid, destroying cards from while they're in your opponent's deck. and or hand, but mostly their deck. That way, when you play Baron Zemo, you now pull a higher costed card because you've destroyed through Yondu or Gladiator some of their lower costed cards. That's the purpose of Baron Zemo. If you don't have him and you like Mill, he's a fantastic addition. If you don't like Mill, you just won't use this card. And even Baron Zemo isn't even in every single Mill deck as well. That's another thing. So, by and large, you probably won't be using Baron Zemo too much if you unlock him. Loki has taken a complete fall from grace. He took so many nerfs at the expense of Arishem that now he is just in a state of disrepair. Nobody really uses him. You barely see Loki being played. And it will continue to be that way unless they buff him or figure out how to get him separate from Arishem so you don't continue to improve the Arishem deck. So if you get Loki, again, this is probably a card you just won't use in its current state, but the team at Second Dinner is very good about buffing cards that are languishing, and sometimes it takes longer than we would like, but ultimately they like to get to a spot where all of the cards are usable, except for Adam Warlock. But hopefully that's on the way. As an aside, Loki also requires you to have a good overall game knowledge of every deck and card almost, because you're playing with your opponent's cards. And while they are cheaper, that definitely helps ease that burden. You still need to know how to play their deck. And then even if Loki matches up into a combo deck, like I love to play Phoenix Force, when somebody plays Loki against me, I'm almost always snapping that, because they can play my discounted cards, but they won't draw the combo they need. Discard is also another bad matchup for Loki. So there's some terrible matchups. There's also some good ones, like maybe a Scar Surtur is a fantastic matchup for Loki. But overall, it can be hit or miss, especially depending on what the meta is. And yeah, you just probably won't end up using Loki too much if you end up unlocking him. So will Nerd Dynamite be unlocking Redwing? No, I will not. I am hoarding my keys. I have enough ultimately to get Redwing if at some point during the week I change my mind, if I watch some other creators and it looks really interesting and I get struck with a fantastic idea. But this card seems pretty straightforward. It leans into a random aspect, so for me it would be all about minimizing that randomness, and I don't know how much of that you could do. So otherwise, this is just a week I'm going to pass on and continue building up my resources for cards that I ultimately find more interesting. So to recap, Redwing is a good card despite everything I've said. I think he will be a good card. He'll find a home. Cheating out cards out of your hand is good no matter what that card is. Even if it's a 1-2, it's now just a minimum 3-5. You kind of had to build your deck again to get him to move with some move activators. So there's not a zero cost there per se. But overall, I think it will be good enough to justify, and you should be able to find a deck for him to actually succeed in and look good in. Baron Zemo is not good. That's right, not good, as I continue to insult Mill, because even in Mill decks, Baron Zemo might only be in a handful of them. Loki is not good right now, so hope for a buff, and otherwise just stay away. So overall for this week, if you don't have any of the cards, I don't know if Redwing is good enough to justify trying to use keys, and he probably won't be good enough to use tokens on. So I think this is just another good week to save on if you are somebody that conserves your resources for more powerful or interesting cards that are more in your archetype. But maybe you like the way Redwing performs and you end up going for him, because I do think he will be a good card. Thanks to everybody that's watched this deep into the video, and thanks to all the members of the channel. Until next time.